All right, I think we're ready to get started here. Thank you everyone for joining us for this very special edition of our webinars. We're calling this one Coffee with Chairman Geren. My name is Kelsey Erickson Streufert. I'm the Vice President of Government Relations and Advocacy for the Texas Restaurant Association. And I've got two great guests with me here today, Dr. Emily Williams-Knight, who's our President and CEO, and Representative Charlie Geren. Representative Geren is a true leader and expert in the Texas House of Representatives. He was first elected in 2000 to represent District 99, which covers Northwest Tarrant County. He's been the longtime chairman of the House Administration Committee, which oversees the House's budget, operations, and procedures. He's also a member of the Licensing Administrative Committee, which oversees alcohol issues, and the Committees on Energy Resources and Mass Violence Prevention and Community Safety. During his tenure in the Texas House, Representative Geren has received many awards and honors, often for his work in support of free enterprise and business. Representative Geren was twice named a top 10 legislator from Texas Monthly. He's also received the Guardian of Small Business and Most Valuable Player Awards from NFIB, and the Champion of Free Enterprise Award from the Texas Association of Business, just to name a few. Prior to joining the Texas House, Representative Geren served for 6 years on the Texas Water Development Board and 4 years on the Tarrant Regional Water District Board of Directors. He also served for many years as a deputy to the United States Marshal Service. Aside from his legislative work, Representative Geren is an active community leader who has served on the boards of the Ronald McDonald House, the Fort Worth Zoo, and Junior Achievement. He's a trustee of Texas Christian University and is vice president of the Southwestern Exposition and Livestock Show. Finally, and very exciting for us, Representative Geren is a rancher and a restaurateur. He's president of Railhead Smokehouse in Fort Worth. Representative Geren, thank you so much for joining us today. We feel very honored and grateful that you're taking some time to talk to us and our members. I'll kick it off to you for some introductory remarks, and then I think Emily wanted to say some introductory remarks too, and then we'll just dive into questions if that's all right.
Well, really, Kelsey, I appreciate you and Emily having me here to do this today. You know, we're all struggling since the initial shutdowns in April. I was fortunate enough to get a PPP loan, but I got it early, and so by the time they'd made changes to it, mine was gone. And now they can't figure out how I need to file for forgiveness. It's really a mess, but we'll get through it. And you know, it's the additional burdens that have been placed on us and expenses. I've spent $10,000 on plexiglass. I have a outside company come in and do a deep clean every week. I don't know how much money we're spending on our sanitizing equipment and the additional labor that we've had to employ to keep our customers safe. And like most of y'all on the call, 50% is fine, but with social distancing, I can't get there. I talked to the athletic director at TCU about their football season, and they're talking about 50% right now is the governor's order. But with social distancing, they can only get about 23%. So instead of having 20,000 fans, they can have about 8,000. If it actually happens. And then with the local ordinances, obviously our mask ordinance went into effect before the statewide did. But based on Restaurant Association's recommendation, we've been masked up since April. My employees have. We put in, before we opened, we're able to open at 25%. We had hand sanitizing locations all over the place. I think I've only got a 6,000 square foot restaurant. I think I've got 12 hand sanitizing stations. So it's been a real challenge, and managing the labor costs has been a real challenge. And frankly, when we were takeout only, and we're set up, and we were already set up with a drive-through window, my margins were higher at takeout only because my labor costs went to nothing. but now my volumes came back up real good once we were open for dining until July. And then when the numbers started peaking, the bottom fell out again. And we were 90% June over June. It looks like we'll be down to probably 60% July over July. And I know all of y'all are facing this same challenge, and the governor's with what the president's office said yesterday, it discouraged me some about further openings, because when the president said that some of the states opened too early, well, they were kind of pressured to open early by the president. And it's a Governor Abbott's job right now is a very, very difficult job. And he's managing it, I think, pretty well. We've got to get a control over the hospitalization numbers. They have got to plateau or start down, I think, before he's going to do anything else. And I'll go back to y'all now.
Thank you, Representative. Emily, oh, you're on mute.
Yep, I think I'd figured this out by now. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, and I just want to personally actually thank Representative Geren, because, having stepped new into my role when this kind of pandemic hit, right, having someone who actually understands the legislature has done incredible good work for so long, but also as a source of truth for me. So when I was trying to navigate these early days, if everyone remembers when we were going to close, how we're going to close, who knows what, and our really, I think where we've stepped up as an association is that one source of truth for everyone, right? So we gather all the facts, we can help swell the rumor mill. But Representative, you've just been just a great ally really to the sector, and to have somebody in such a key role also understand the pain of the sector, because I think what you just said is critical. We can see even in the open table numbers, right? And that's just obviously reservations based, but you can actually see that when we came out of our opening for about 6 weeks, things were actually looking positive. I mean, we were nowhere out of the woods because the costs were accelerating so high. We had trouble getting employees back. Then you saw the public narrative and media narrative start to change when the numbers started to rise, and we had to really flex our muscle and start to talk about, listen, why are we making restaurants the evil, one here? We don't have any evidence that indoor dining, really harms people in any way. There really is no data. Even the governor's office would confirm that, but we're up against more public sentiment than we're even policy. So, I just want to thank you, because having someone with your tenure and obviously strength on this call and investing time with our members means so much, because I think what we don't have is just certainty. When can we expand further? When will consumers start to feel better about dining out? When will some of the restrictions get lifted? And all of those unknowns contribute to how long can I go at 60% of my revenue? How long can I go at 50% of what I was making? And for so many of our independents, that question is becoming more urgent, especially as we are following very closely what's happening in DC. And the good news is it does appear that the PPP could be refunded. It's just how quick can we get it here for a second round, right? Can it really be here by August 7th to August 10th, which may help quite a few. So, I just want to thank you from my seat. You've just been a great champion for us, and we're really grateful.
Well, it's been great working with you. Your enthusiasm and energy is pretty incredible.
Most days, right?
Well, yeah. There's days it's hard to be enthusiastic, but
I know. I figure if I give up hope and I don't believe we'll get through it, then hope is lost, right? So I've got, and I know we're going to get through it. It's going to look different. I just want to make sure that we're doing everything we can. And then what we're going to transition into is, what does 21 look like? Because legislatively, we've accomplished so much from the governor's office and executive orders, but now we have a real vision to solidify those, legislatively. So going forward, we can preserve these revenue sources. So I'll kick it over to Kelsey, because I think we'll transition into another great unknown, the 2020 legislative session.
Yes. So Representative Geren, would love to hear your thoughts, especially with your chairmanship administration. What does next session look like? What should we start preparing for? What does the Texas legislature and the Capitol even look like with COVID as our new normal?
Kelsey, I think, the first thing is the most important thing to consider for the next session. The legislature is set up to kill legislation, not to pass it. And this next session, the number of bills that actually make it to the governor's desk are going to be less than any previous session. And I say that because it's going to take more time to move it through the process. You know, we don't know what leadership in the House is going to look like yet. We'll have a good idea in November. But no matter which party is running the House, things are just going to be a whole lot different. With the budget is going to be incredibly difficult. I think we're probably looking at close to $20 billion in cuts that we're going to have to make. Now that's less any federal money that the state gets, and Governor Abbott is working closely with the president, and whether the president wins or loses in the fall, he's still going to have control over a pocket full of money until the end of the year. And Governor Abbott's in a good place to get that a good bit of that money funneled to Texas, and that's one of the hard spots that Governor Abbott's in. He's trying to manage the state, but also manage his relationship with the administration so that money doesn't get cut off or doesn't get reduced significantly. And that money's going to go a long way, hopefully, to cover that $20 billion hole. I mean, I was serving in 2011 when we had to make, I think it was like $16 billion in cuts, and it was incredibly difficult. We also have redistricting on our plate, and that won't happen until next summer in special session because we're not going to get the census numbers. So that'll take some of the pressure off. But there's a push to expand Medicaid, and expanding Medicaid on one hand sounds good because you get more federal money, but on the second hand, where does our part of that money come from when we're looking at a huge budget shortfall? And I'm going to get partisan for just a minute, but because it affects me as well as it does anybody else in the restaurant business. If the Democrats take control of the House, you're going to see paid sick leave on the floor of the House. You're going to see mandatory insurance on the floor of the House. You're going to see a lot of things that are not good for I personally don't think are good for our industry. That being said, I work well with the Democrats. I've got a lot of friends that are Democrats, but that will be a challenge. Now, would any of that get out of the Senate? I don't think so. But that doesn't mean that won't be there. And if we have something like that negatively affects our industry, and we're trying to get some legislation passed, especially the drinks to go, alcohol to go, that type of thing, you'll be fighting with them and then against them, and some of them won't get over the against me. So it's going to be a balancing act for the industry. It really is. And through the governor's executive orders, we've made some significant changes that are very, very important. And I think that we can get some more done, and I hopefully soon. The 51 percenters, I feel your pain, and I really don't think that we're going to get another executive order until we see those hospital numbers flatten or start down. And until that happens, I hate to give you any hope, but we're working on it hard. I know Emily's on with them every day. I've been on with them at least every day about that and other issues. And but I think the work that the Restaurant Association has done has gone a long way, and y'all reaching out and working with other people, Lance Lively, Tom Spillman. That's important, because as much as we think we're right in everything we do, they still have a lot of power, and they can kill stuff. They're really good at it. I've been on both sides of it, and but it's going to be incredibly challenging. I think that we need to be careful as an association not to overreach. Let's prioritize where we're going. If we have 12 priorities, let's go after our first 3 first, and then let's work on the others after we've got some progress. We don't know who the chair of licensing is going to be. And that's going to be an incredibly important relationship for y'all to have. I'll probably use my seniority pick to go back on licensing. At least I'm looking at it anyway. And so I'll be on it. But if I decide to use that pick for my one pick, but I don't know. It's just going to be a very unpleasant session. No matter who's in control of the House, it's going to be close. I mean, it could be as close as 2009 when it was 76-74. And when it's 76-74, you have to make some compromises to get your stuff done. And any number less than 80 for Republicans are going to be having to look over their shoulders and working with the Democrats in order to get legislation passed. And the Restaurant Association is. But I'm very concerned, even though I know it'll never get out of the Senate, I'm very concerned about paid sick leave and mandatory insurance. I do provide insurance, but I know everybody doesn't, and I know how expensive it is. So it's a major cost to me.
Right, and at a time, as you've pointed out, restaurants are already dealing with unprecedented costs and expenses and decreased revenue because of the fear and the concern out there. So I know our members share that concern as well. Chairman Geren, I would love for you to kind of educate some of our members on some of the alcohol issues, because we've talked a lot about how important it was to build a coalition around some of these issues. You mentioned some of our partners, Lance Lively, Tom Spillman. Give us a little bit of that history and why it's so important that we do work with our partners in the other tiers of the alcohol industry to get things done.
When mixed beverage passed back in the 70s, I guess it was, that the Booze Brothers, they wrote it. In other words, the liquor stores and the beer distributors wrote it. The restaurants benefited from it at the time. But everything in this system, there's, the craft breweries have changed things, and they have not in the past tried to work very well with the beer boys. They fought them, and they've had some victories. And this last session, we got everybody together and we passed monumental legislation that helped them, but only by working with the wholesale beer distributors. The alcohol to go for the restaurants is huge. And I've been talking with Lance throughout the whole thing. And I told him, I said, Lance, I want you to sit down with Emily and y'all work out something. So we'll continue this. And I said, I know there's a lot of your members that benefit from it because they're selling more alcohol. He said, well, yeah, but I've got some guys that don't sell, they don't sell to the restaurants. And so, he has a balancing act, but I think, and you'd have to confirm this, Emily, I think that Lance is on board to work this issue out so we can not have it as an executive order. We can put it in statute. We can move forward. TABC has been incredibly, it's worked incredibly close with y'all. And because of that, and which is really unusual, but the General Nettles is he's a good executive director. But, Lava Cantina, now they're back open. I think Billy Bob's is about to be open with an F&B permit.
Mucky Duck got open as well on that language this week. 2 DFW or VFW, I call it DFW. VFWs were open using that sheet, and it's really like you said, we're grateful. We know TABC has been under extraordinary pressure as well, but I mean, Lance Lively, Ricky Knox, Tom Spillman, Donnelly, they're all have been really good partners. And I think a little bit of it is representative is that we, Kelsey and I both are new to our roles. And so we just want to do what's right for the industry. And there is a win-win and we can create that. But you're helping bridge that with Lance Lively, I think has really helped because I think we can show that we can grow both sides and it's a win, even though there may be some history there, which thankfully I don't know. So it helps a little bit.
Well, I mean, actually, you know, the history between Lance and Richie is they're best friends.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, they tailgate together at the UT football games. I mean, and they all, you know, Tom, Lance, Richie, they all hang out in my office together. It's
Wow.
no, they're friends, and you know, it's but they also represent their associations, and it you know, I've been on both sides with both groups, and it's more fun when I'm on the same side with my friends. But you know, you have to understand that just doesn't always happen, especially in the alcohol industry, because you've got, you know, there's a lot of people don't think any of us need to be selling any alcohol. And you know, I only have a beer wine, and so it's only 12% of my volume, so it's a big deal, but it's not as big a deal as it is to some restaurants that it's half their volume or more. And you know, I say it's a big deal. I sell 700 draft beers a day, but
Wow.
it's still only 12% of my volume, or that's what I was selling before the shutdown. And so we sell a lot of beer. We just sell it pretty cheap.
Good to know.
That's great. Let's talk about COVID a little bit more and sort of where restaurants are at right now. You mentioned the PPP in your opening remarks, Chairman Geren, and as Emily said, we're working really hard at the federal level to make sure there's a second round, and maybe even to open it up so that it can be used on, you know, more things, because we know, of course, that to keep people employed, you know, it's more than just a paycheck. You got to be able to pay your rent or your mortgage. You've got to be able to purchase that PPE, you know, all those hand sanitizing stations and the cleaning services and the plexiglass. But, you know, as most restaurants sit right now, they're in a boat like you, where they got their PPP, but that money's long gone. And
it is right here. This is my paperwork to file for forgiveness, but we don't know how to even do that.
Right. The rules change every day, it seems, on how that works. And of course, July has just been brutal in terms of customers coming out and dining. And so, you know, we're working hard at the federal level. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, but we're also looking at what, if any, resources the state can provide, whether that's, you know, using some of the $6 billion Texas received from the CARES Act, or is there some kind of tax relief that we could look at? The rainy day fund, of course, is always mentioned. So we'd just love to hear your thoughts on kind of the federal and the state opportunities for additional relief.
On the federal end, I mean, I don't know. I've talked with Senator Cornyn's office a couple of times. They're confident they're going to pass something, but you know, you've got now Senator Cruz saying not no, but hell no, no more relief. And you know, what do the Democrats have to have in order for the Republicans to vote for it, or for them to vote for it, and what the Republicans have to have in order to get the Democrat? It's a real mess. On the state end, I would never hold, during this session, I wouldn't hold out any hope at all of getting any state money for our industry, because I don't think any of us are going to be able to say, well, we got to help the restaurant industry. Well, then, you know, then what about the hair salons? What about childcare? And childcare industry is obviously to the legislators more important than the restaurants are, and especially with people going back to work if they can. My niece is a perfect example. She wants to go back to work and was going to, except now school's not going to start, and she doesn't have anybody to keep her kid, and she's worried about putting her kid in childcare, or finding, you know, a suitable childcare. You know, her kid goes to a Star Point school, which is, you know, kids with special needs, and so they've got you know, that's if the state, that'll be one of the first places they look, and bailing us out would be good, but honestly, I don't think it's going to happen. I think that building our customers' confidence back is is be our number one priority. And, you know, not beating it into some of these people's heads, wear a damn mask. I mean, just do it. And, you know, when you sit down, then you can take it off, but just wear it. Don't fight us about it. Don't fight, you know, the state or the city about it. Just wear it. You know, it's the last things I've seen, which are very hopeful. North Texas Health Science Center and UT Southwestern are saying it's working up here.
Yeah.
But, you know, our hospitalization rates have not flattened out yet, because this is before the mask order. The people that are going to the hospital now got sick 4th of July or prior to that. Yeah, and a lot of people have died, and you know, it's very unfortunate. But more are gonna die, and until we get, you know, and we're looking at Labor Day, and you know, they're in a, you know, there's a fight over concerts on the Trinity River between the Trinity River Vision and the city of Fort Worth. They want to put floaters on the river and have concerts, and the mayor's saying no, you can't. So now they've gone to the Attorney General's office to try to force it. It's, you know, we need to be sensible, and I think one of the things, Emily, that you and Kelsey have done that have helped us is you've not joined in the fight and criticized the governor or the governor's office, because once you get on the bad side, it's really hard to get off of it. I mean, I got in a gubernatorial powers fight with Governor Perry, and he vetoed 81 bills that year. 9 of them were mine. and 2 of those were restaurant bills. All 9 of them are now law, but you know, when you do that, things don't work out well for you. When you criticize their office, they remember. So
yeah,
we're doing a really good job working with their office.
And I think that, you know, we've certainly been asked a lot about our relationship with the governor's office. And I have to say, you know, we don't have a lot of negative to find. Is this where we want to be as an industry? Absolutely not. Did the governor create COVID-19? No. I like to remind people that we were the only industry that got brought to 75% at the time. And really for almost 6 to 7 weeks, if you remember, things were looking great. And we were so hopeful. We were sort of the, you know, Governor Abbott was brought to DC to recognize this incredible reopening. And people tend to forget, you know, we don't like to look back at all the good. We just like to look back and reflect on the negative. But from his team, who's been unbelievably supportive, and I think to your notion, I think we've gone to him with recommendations, right? So we don't just go and say it's unfair, but we've said, okay, if we can't go any further, can we get mixed drinks, right? 2-3 weeks ago now, can we just expand that current waiver? Here's what it looks like, having support like you or Senator Hancock, or, you know, just other people that can say, hey, these are good people, they're trying to survive. But I agree with you. And I also don't think we have any right to criticize right now, because there is no playbook. There is no balancing the economy and saving lives. And there's nobody that knows that answer. So what we can do is try to stick into it together. I did have one question for you, because I hear you on the budget side, and Kelsey is, you know, with her experience, has been such an incredible addition to our team. She's clear that really, and if as you also said, if you create a fiscal note for the state, you're out, right? So there's going to be no either. We'd love a piece of the CARES money. We really feel like we've earned a piece of the CARES money for what we've had to go through and still feed Texans, right? Because without restaurants, at 51% of your food dollar, you're going to have some food scarcity issues. So we've just stepped up in this huge way. One of the places we were looking at, of course, is in taxes, right? How do we keep more liquidity? How do we keep more money in restaurant owners' pockets without creating a fiscal note? So one of the things we've talked about was the mixed beverage tax. I know there was a lot of great work that was done, and a percentage of that was pushed onto the back of the check to the consumer. And we feel like instead of creating some type of, you've seen restaurants create a COVID fee, or is there an opportunity to pass more of that mixed beverage tax to the consumer versus the restaurant owner, and that money is still going to be collected and goes obviously to the state, so there's no fiscal note. We're just trying to think about, Representative, we'd love your thoughts about what are things that we can do that don't ask the state for money, but provide some financial relief to the sector if we can't get additional funding, right, from the state. And so I'd love your thoughts on that.
That, again, on the House side, would fall back on who's in control, because frankly, that's a tax bill. I mean, it is. And the Democrats are going to say, well, you're putting this on my people. And the Republicans are going to say, I'm not voting for a tax increase. So it's going to be it's a, you know, especially the ones that have taken the no tax pledge, no new tax pledge. That will be that will be a challenge, a very difficult. That'll be a really steep hill to climb, I think. It's something I think that should be talked about. I think that you get that bill filed and get a hearing and talk about it, and it go to Ways and Means, and I think that would it'd be good to flush it out and really see where you're going with it. But we just have to be cognizant of the fact that it is a tax increase to the consumer.
Yep, and I think you're right. I think talking about it's key, because I think we're trying to just solve the equation of, if we can't get that relief, and we know that our independents are going to be the hardest hit, right? They don't have the capitalization of a large chain. They don't have the private equity backing typically, and they've survived this road, but at some point they're putting now their own personal money even, deeper into this. If we don't have a way to show them there's a clear path forward, and that sort of leads me to, and I probably already know your answer, but Kelsey, delivery. Because that's another opportunity, right? That we have a lot of noise, both on the Democratic and Republican side, around the delivery companies, and in some cases, what we would consider predatory fees. Kelsey's the first to point out, Emily, you're not living in Boston anymore. We're not going to just go in and cap fees in a free market. But we've seen this happen across the US now, and not always just in very blue states or blue cities. That's another place that if you're putting every order out, let's say people aren't dining in, you've got to use delivery. The third party is charging up to 35 or 40% of that check and charging the consumer, and the restaurant is losing. And so any thoughts on that arena of maybe a transparency bill and pricing? Or
yeah, and I was going to jump in too and say one of our chief concerns there is that sometimes restaurants end up on these sites, these third-party delivery apps, without their consent. And so this third-party delivery app is using their trademarks, their menu. Sometimes they even charge different prices. And so in terms of the free market working, right, to me, that's a real point of concern, because you don't have two businesses negotiating and reaching a deal together, right? You sort of have one that's holding the other hostage. So that's another piece of this that we're trying to shine some light on.
We use Favor and DoorDash and don't pay them. I mean, if they want us to pay them, then they need to go somewhere else. We refuse to do that. Uber's come to us with a contract, and I just gave it back to them and said, I'm not going to pay you. You figure out how to get it, get your end of it from wherever you're delivering, but we're not going to pay it. But I do think some type of transparency would be good. You're right. We're not going to be able to cap their fees. It's, they can charge what they want, but and I have no idea. The only one I've ever used is Grizzly. During the first lockdown, I had, vodka delivered to my house, and I thought that was the greatest thing ever. That guy just showed up on my front porch 30 minutes after I hit go. And it was, there was a surcharge. There was an upcharge. It was about $3 a bottle.
Not bad.
No, it wasn't bad, and I really wasn't sure how much it was until I went to the liquor store a week later at the same liquor store that it came from, and I saw how much it was. And so it's about $3 a bottle. And I said, I've never ordered from DoorDash or Favor, so I don't even know how they upcharge you. All I know is DoorDash is one of the most difficult companies to deal with, because they don't understand the menu that they're ordering from when they call it in.
Right.
Yeah, that's very common feedback.
Yeah, that's of course a problem then, because your consumer thinks they're getting something, right? They think they've ordered something, and they often hold the restaurant responsible, even if the restaurant didn't have any say in what was presented on the third-party delivery app. So that's, I think, again, where transparency and ensuring that there's true bargaining power, right, and that the free market really is working, I think makes a lot of sense, even for Texas, which is a proud believer in free enterprise.
Oh, and I agree. I do think there needs to be some control. Now, some of the restaurants here are using, especially during shutdown, we're using their employees, so they were able to bring their employee back and letting them deliver. It does, it poses a liability issue, and we looked into it, and I decided not to do it. But it does pose a liability issue. And you need to, check with your liability carrier and make sure, first you need to check to make sure your employee has automobile insurance. And because if they don't, you've really got a problem. But if they do, it'll go to, any claim would go to them, their insurance first, and then come to you. But I would check with my insurance carrier to make sure. But I know several restaurants in Fort Worth just chose to do, use the Campese model.
Yeah, very familiar with Campese's. That was a great segue for liability protections. That's an issue that we know is being discussed at the Hill. We know Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is pretty adamant that we provide some kind of liability protections to businesses that have reopened during COVID and are following the health and safety guidelines from the state, from the CDC. Would love to get your thoughts on that, Chairman Geren, if you think that we need some kind of liability protections and what the scope of that should be.
Without liability protection, there's going to be thousands of lawsuits filed.
Right.
And I don't care how careful or what you've been doing, there's going to be, it'll be another tobacco case. Some trial lawyers will get incredibly wealthy over it, and we'll spend a lot of time in court and a lot of money. And so we do need that protection. And while the argument would be, how the hell do you know you got it at the railhead? You don't. But you need to, obviously, if one of my employees can prove they got it at the railhead, then they're covered by my workers' comp.
Yep.
But a customer claims it, and then I get sued, even whether I win or not. I'm going to spend a lot of money that I don't have to spend on that type of thing. So we need it at the federal level, and I know there's several groups that are looking at it at the state level, and I've even talked to the trial lawyers about it, saying there's got to be some kind of protection on this, and I haven't gotten a bunch of pushback from them when I've asked them about it.
And Representative, what you said is so true, and we know that part of this, and there was a news alerters were sort of following what's happening on the Hill, that it looks like it may not be one bill, right, but a collection of bills that get passed. And we know Senator Cornyn has been very active in liability protection. So on Friday, some of that, the terms of that were, I use the word leaked, right, but made more public than they probably should have been, but likely intentionally. And it was through the end of 2024. So sort of a 5-year liability shield. And I think what I always try to tell restaurants and explain, because many of them don't see liabilities as big of a concern because it's hard to prove causation. Sorry, that's my children. It's hard to prove my real life here. It's hard to prove causation. However, what you said is critical. They will get tied up with funds they don't have trying to protect themselves. And that's our biggest concern, is that until you start to see a trial lawyer, and I have plenty of trial lawyers I love, but they will find a business and they can pummel 2, 3, 6, 10 cases. And at that point, you don't have any funds to fight. And so that's why we're adamant this has to get done. But it appears that it will be done in this federal round of coronavirus funding. But I think we all have to stay vocal on this because it's a bigger issue than many of our members realize.
Well, and one of the things that concerns me is that, until one of us gets sued, we don't know if our liability coverage will back this up.
Right.
And you don't know that till you get sued. And, I don't have all the confidence in the world in my insurance company because, I don't know, in 34 years, I've had 3 liability claims, people falling in the parking lot. And, they settled one of them for a woman with a chipped tooth for $200,000. And I'm going, give me a break, man. I don't know what she got for $200,000, but it's more than a chipped tooth. And so, I don't have a lot of confidence in how the insurance companies will handle it, or if they will, or if they'll deny us coverage as they have business interruption.
I was just thinking the same thing. Based on our recent experience with business interruption coverage, it's scary to put your faith, in your insurance policy, frankly, to have all your eggs in that basket. Let's talk quickly about sort of workforce. I know many of our restaurants struggled to rehire employees when business was coming back. Now, of course, business has fallen off again. There's concern about the pandemic, extra unemployment expiring. I know many of our restaurants are concerned that if that benefit goes away, while restaurants frankly don't need a lot of staff, that those employees will move on to grocery or other industries that are booming. And then of course you throw into that schools potentially not being open, daycares not being open. How do working parents manage just all of this that's being thrown at them? Would love to hear your thoughts, Chairman, on just how do we focus on our workforce? How do we empower them and get them, to come back into the workforce like we need to be able to keep our businesses afloat and keep our economy going?
Well, and I lost some employees to HEB, some of the grocery chains during the initial layoff. Several have come back because they like the flexibility of working in a restaurant as opposed to a very strict schedule at the grocery stores. And frankly, and I'm not going to accuse any of my employees of this, but we don't drug test anymore. If I did, I don't think I don't know how many would fail, but I don't want to know. If they show up and do a good job, I'm fine. And a lot of those other jobs require that. But I've lost 2 employees to yard services. I mean, they're paying $18 an hour to mow lawns, and I'm not paying $18 an hour. And so, and these were real good employees. Both these guys were real good employees, but right now they're mowing lawns. One of them's probably right down the street. So, it's going to be a challenge. But with unemployment where it is now, one of the things that's been affected us negatively is, why would I come back to work when I can make $1,000 a week staying home? Mm-hmm. That extra $600, if you're getting it, plus your state unemployment, you can get up to about $1,000 a week. And if you're getting $1,000 a week and you're just sitting home, why go back to work? And I didn't have any of that, but I've got some friends that are in the business and that's the case.
And it looks like the recent proposal a couple hours ago now is that it would be some type of extension, but it'd be almost a 70% match of what you were making prior. So that 600 would wheel down if you're working. And so It seems like there could come to a compromise that would be good for business. And, we sort of get stuck like you, I'm sure, is that, if you're used to making X dollars in tips, but now you've seen the dining room fall, the traffic down to 20-30% of what it ever was, it's hard because you can't make that commitment to that individual. So let's say, our industry, and something you mentioned, Representative, we talked about as a team last night, that we're deeply concerned in particular about working mothers, because that we are the #1 industry for single working mothers. And if you now have children, and I live in Tarrant County, your county, and now that they're not going back to school until the end of September, you now see people starting to go, well, how am I going to go back to work? And if we can't get people back to work, we can't run our businesses, whether they're restaurants or something else. And so, this is an area where that unemployment is going to be a critical piece of this next package, but then creating an environment somehow in our restaurants to be able to have that flexibility that our workforce is going to need, in particular, the single moms that make up such a big percentage of our industry. We all are deeply concerned about how they're going to get back to work now.
And we've been, at the Railhead, we've been working very closely because that is the case, and a lot of the ladies that work for me have children, and they've kind of been balancing out where one of them takes care of the others, but we're allowing them to swap shifts.
It's great.
So if the boyfriend or husband is working nights, maybe we move them to day, and just so we can keep them on. Now, I will say, in going, daily sales and going over the tip reports, some people are being very generous.
Good. That's good to hear.
And it's, some are, like I had one last night that tipped 500%.
Wow. I love to hear that. I know we all say it, and I know you can't see Anna, but she's so vocal about this, is when you do eat out, please tip generously, because you always have to make up for those that don't tip, which is an annoyance, but then now they're making up for lost tips from just not having the customer volume. So whatever we can do as consumers to recognize that, I'm happy to hear you say that you have the evidence that's happening, because that's what our hope is, that the community will keep.
And when I work, when I work their closing tapes every day or every other day, whenever I do it, I go down the tips, because that's also an indication of somebody that might be not charging what they need to be charging and getting over tipped because of it. But so it works both ways.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. But yeah, I think that flexibility is a good message right now of how a restaurant can be as flexible as possible with an individual worker. And I had not considered the idea of employees helping one another, even with childcare, but it's going to take a village to get the sector through this. And that one population, I think we're more and more growing concerned about. So those are good ideas. I think that, hope people are listening can implement.
I think you're starting to see that with school too. People are talking about, getting a small group of families together to help each other manage distance learning, because of course, like being a parent's a full-time job, you have your full-time job, and then you're also now to some extent asked to be a teacher. And so it's a lot to juggle, as Emily in particular can tell us.
Yeah, I'm like, here it is, guys. So you got to lock down and do it. But yeah, and I think I have a very supportive, a husband that I'm very fortunate. So I feel grateful. But I know for many of our employees, we're going to have to figure this out, because we had a crisis in labor before this happened. We were estimating about 300,000 jobs, that gap, which is why our high school program is so critical. So I'm sure people know we have about 175 districts across the state that have a CTE program in restaurant and food service. And for so many of these youth, especially in Title I districts, this is their out, right? This is their chance. They can come out with a good paying job. All of this now, we're going to have to reassess, how do you bring talent back into the sector, and what's it going to look like? What's the job going to look like? Everything is changing. And so, there's this survival, and then there's this revival recovery. And it seems like we were on that revival recovery, and we've slid back into survival in many cases, especially for our smaller restaurants, which is why we've got to get this federal package over the line and make sure restaurants are included in a big way. Tourism and restaurants.
Emily, I think one of the important things that we all have to look at is how the experience that we have with COVID when the schools do start opening,
yeah.
Do all of a sudden we get an outbreak, or are we able to control it? Or, so I know it's high on the governor's list. They're looking at it very closely. I talked to them kid. The same thing and frankly, how is the Texas House going to meet in January? I'm going to take a lot of knowledge from the schools. How did they get through it? Now, I'm not going to have, I've only got about 200 people on the floor of the House, including staff, that I'm going to have to worry about, but 200 people in there in that confined area is still, and so we're looking at all the protocols for opening day on right now. And we're installing, we've already installed some plexiglass. We're in the process of installing more. I'm gonna go down there next week to figure out where we need to put it on the house floor. We're buying those UV robots for sanitizing, because we can't, because of the antiques and the artwork in the Capitol, we can't use that misting system because it'll deteriorate the paintings and the antiques. And so, there's a lot of challenges there. What are we going to do when we have a COVID case in the Capitol? The Senate is a different animal, because they can socially distance on the floor of the Senate. The House cannot do that. Hopefully, and we have a survey out, or we'll have a survey out this weekend to the members about what are you going to do? Do you think we ought to wear a mask? Do you think we ought to wear a face shield? Temperature checks, all of that, and that survey is going to be out either this weekend or the first of next week, so we can hear back from all of them, and then we'll share it with the Senate and with the governor's office to try to come up with some common protocols, because we're going to have to work together. I think it's in Tennessee. It is in Tennessee, where the House is open, and the House they were doing real fine. Then they got comfortable and they got around each other, and House members they started getting it. The Senate is shut down to the public. That half of of the Tennessee Capitol is shut down to the public. The House side's open to the public. And I don't know, I don't know. I actually, frankly, haven't talked to the governor about what are we going to do? Who are we going to let in the Capitol?
That was my question for you.
What are going to be the requirements to get in the Capitol? I mean, it is the people's business and the people's building, but at the same time, we have an obligation to all the employees in the building to keep them safe. And the Capitol has a capacity of about 6,000 people. And Kelsey, I know you've been in it when it seems like there were twice that many.
Yes, sir.
I mean, it's uncomfortable before. It was uncomfortable before COVID.
Right.
With COVID, if it ever gets that full, I'm gonna have my meetings out on the lawn.
Have a barbecue. Have a barbecue, yeah.
And if you want to come in my office, you better have a mask. I'm not going to take meetings without masks. And if you want to meet and you don't want to wear a mask, we'll go out in the hall and talk, because I'm not going to expose my employees to that.
Well, and Chairman,
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kelsey. No, please go ahead.
I was going to say, I love your point about we have to be prepared for these things, because it's not a question of if, right? It's a question of when. And we've tried to be very clear about that with our restaurants and frankly with the media, because it's, as we say over and over again, COVID is not a foodborne illness. There's no data that shows that restaurants are a hotspot. In fact, restaurants are uniquely situated to prevent the spread of COVID, because you go in, you sit at a table, just with your group. It's been socially distant. Your wait staff, everyone's got a face covering. But still, we know with our case numbers, every business is going to have a case of COVID at some point, every group. And so you've got to be prepared ahead of time to know how to, identify it, isolate the person, get them tested, all of that. So I'm proud of the work we've done to really share the CDC protocols on that and remind folks you've got to be prepared ahead of time.
Well, and because you're not at risk because of your age or underlying health is BS. You can tell that to the 44-year-old friend of mine with no underlying health condition that's dead now. He died 2 weeks ago, and it was COVID. Or the 42-year-old friend of mine that's in the hospital right now. He's very healthy with young children. And so don't tell me it's not dangerous. I don't care how old you are. And so we have to impress on these people that think that, it isn't going to happen to me. It could. And if you have to go in and get vetted, it's not a good experience.
No. And I think that, we're in this together. And so the hope is that, for me, restaurants shouldn't be a partisan issue, right? Restaurants feed 51% of your food dollar every single day. They're your community leaders, the second largest employer. We're the most diverse in our population of any industry. We've got more minority managers than any sector. We are, in my opinion, we're the place that could bring people back together again in a world that seems to be so partisan. And so our hope, representatives, you go into this session, as you said, right? You've been giving us great guidance. Pick the 2 or 3 things that are going to make the biggest difference. Everything else is going to have to wait, but we know those couple of things, and then put everything you have into it, because we can't afford to lose the sector. We also can't afford to, we have so many of our fast food restaurants are members, and they're critical, and they've done an incredible job. But I don't want to go to a world where I only pick up my food through a window. It's that experience of coming into your place and standing with people and having a beer and having a sense of belonging, that you're starting to see this emotional and social wear on our society, because we're not practicing being polite to one another, right? You just watch what's going on, even just on Twitter. And it's, you probably wouldn't say a lot of these things if you were sitting around a table. You'd have a debate, a thoughtful discussion. So I think that, we've just got to continue. And I am grateful to Governor Abbott. I've never met him in person. But I can't imagine another governor right now has been as receptive to this sector and to all of you that see the value. And so I just want to get good work done and make sure that these owners and these community members are here in a year. Because I don't want to just pull up in my car, and I'm not a good cook. So my family's kind of, really needs the restaurant industry to survive, because they don't want me to cook.
Well, when Mindy and I built this house, her mother asked her why the hell we were putting the kitchen in. And it turned out she's a damn good cook.
Oh, so you're lucky.
because we've been doing it a lot. But you know, my friend Matt Rose at Whataburger used to be the chair of Burlington Northern, and I said, "Boy, you picked a hell of a time to go over there because this Whataburger is set up for this." My friend that owns Chicken Express, I mean, it's a. They said, "Oh man, it's terrible." I said, "Don't give me that. You talk to some of us, it really is terrible." And honestly, I haven't had it as bad as most have. You know, the ones that were not set up for any type of really to go, they've had it a lot worse.
Yeah, and I think we have to make sure, as Kelsey said, the trust building, and Representative, you mentioned this too, right? People need to feel comfortable. And so I think when we went to the Workforce Commission with Dallas College and took that promise and turned it into certification, 5 or more employees get trained. We then can have a campaign, Dine at the Sign. But, you know, I don't think right now that 50% is what's limiting us. I think it's the consumer sentiment, and that we can help control. And we, as an association, partnered, we've made really good relationships with the media, but we know that there's great stories to tell about restaurants. And so we've had to help shift the narrative for them to know that we're not the big COVID spreaders that sometimes you make us out to be. There's no evidence of that, but let's showcase, as Kelsey says, all the proactive things we're doing, but really encouraging our restaurants to get that certification. There is no cost. The Workforce Commission gave the first $500,000 to us in the Dallas College system. And so there's no cost, but to give that comfort and give your employees, I think, they sometimes are afraid too, so to give them the comfort of knowing what you should and shouldn't do. I just, encourage everyone to get certified, especially with no cost. I think there's nothing you can lose by doing it.
I agree. Building consumer confidence is one of our greatest challenges, but social distancing is as big a challenge for a number of us as well. They could take it to 100% tomorrow if I have to social distance. I'm going to still be at about 43%. That's just it. But as I told you yesterday, even as hot as it is, the people that come through my restaurant, they're going to the patio. And there's my everyday beer drinkers. They can't get it. They know they can't. But but my everyday diners, other than construction workers, go straight outside.
Yeah.
And it's hot, as you know, it's hot.
It's hot.
It is, yes. Even for Texas, it's hot right now. We're at the 1 hour mark, and I want to be respectful of Chairman Geren's time. So I'm just going to quickly say thank you to everyone for tuning in. Thank you so much, Chairman Geren, for being with us. Want to give you an opportunity to kind of close with any final thoughts that you have. And Emily, of course, jump in if I've missed anything.
Well, it's really an honor and a pleasure to do this. And I've enjoyed, Emily, working with you and Kelsey since you've been here. It's, you're facing the same challenges I am, just on a much larger basis. And I appreciate it. And we'll get through this. And I appreciate the fact that you've been willing to work with Governor Abbott instead of working against him. I know one of the bar lawsuits was dismissed this week. Another one, nothing's happening. I think they've got one more in Houston that's scheduled for a hearing next week. But making him mad is not a really good way to get anything done.
Yeah, no.
Well said.
Yeah, and so thank you very much. And I am looking forward to session, and appreciate you just in listening. And I'll call sometimes, as you know, and say, hey, what does this mean? And you've been very gracious with your time. And it's just, what?
All right, thank y'all.
Thank you guys. Take care.